Operation Barbarossa was truly significant in World War II. It was the code name for the German attack on the Soviet Union. This invasion is seen as a crucial point in the war because the failure to defeat Soviet forces was a major blow to Germany.
The Soviet occupation of the Baltic states and Bessarabia made Hitler suspicious of Stalin. He saw the Soviet forces getting closer to the Romanian oil fields, which Germany needed. This made the invasion seem necessary for seizure.
Hello everyone. I'm starting uploading videos to my main channel. I think you will find very precious knowledge about language acquisition there. Link is in the description.
Turning to the German strategy, we see the overwhelming size and power of their invasion force. Nearly 3 million German soldiers were organized into 150 divisions. This included 19 panzer divisions, highlighting the importance of armored warfare. These divisions were led by key military figures like Walther von Brauchitsch and Franz Halder. They believed that superior tactics and equipment would lead to a swift victory over the Soviet Union.
Indeed, this German invasion force was the largest in history, a testament to its sheer scale. The Germans were confident in their military prowess and had meticulously structured their forces. They also enlisted Finnish and Romanian divisions to bolster their ranks. Yet despite their preparation, the early arrival of winter took them by surprise. This unforeseen element would prove to be a significant challenge for their campaign.
Adding to their issues, the Germans underestimated the reserves Stalin could deploy. German intelligence wrongly calculated the Soviet reserves, expecting a swift collapse of Soviet resistance. They thought domestic support for the regime would crumble in the face of such an invasion. However, Stalin's ability to mobilize fresh divisions continued to thwart German expectations. This misjudgment highlighted a critical flaw in the German plan and emphasized the strategic miscalculations that occurred.
If you'd like to explore more about these topics, consider joining our membership. Not only would you receive all our transcripts, but you'd also be supporting us in a vital way. Now reflecting on the German assumptions of a quick Soviet collapse, it was a major error. They didn't anticipate the resilience and determination of the Soviet forces who, despite all odds, managed to mount a significant defense.
The Soviet forces had a significant number of tanks and aircraft, even more than the Germans in numbers. However, while their tank capabilities were quite comparable, many of their aircraft were outdated. This was a major disadvantage for the Soviets, as their air force could not effectively match the more modern and better-equipped German Luftwaffe. Despite this disadvantage, the Soviets were in a relatively strong position in terms of ground forces.
But German intelligence made a critical error in estimating Soviet capabilities. They greatly underestimated the reserves that Stalin could mobilize. The Germans expected the Soviet resistance to break quickly, thinking there were not enough troops to counter the invasion. This mistake was one of several by German planners. They failed to recognize that the Soviets could quickly deploy additional divisions, significantly altering the dynamics of the battlefield.
On June 22, 1941, the German forces launched their offensive against the Soviet Union with 3 major army groups. Each group had specific goals and commanders. General Wilhelm von Lieb led the Northern Army Group, pushing from East Prussia towards the Baltic states and Leningrad. Their rapid movement aimed to catch the Soviets off guard and secure a quick advance through the Northern Front.
Meanwhile, in the south, General Gerd von Rundstedt was advancing from southern Poland into Ukraine, aiming for Kiev. His group planned to sweep through Ukraine and eventually secure the Black Sea coast. In the center, General Fedor von Bock was tasked with the main drive toward Moscow. He advanced north of the Pripyat marshes, engaging in one of the most critical thrusts of the invasion, as Moscow was seen as a vital target for German victory.
As the Germans launched their offensive, they caught the Soviet forces completely off guard, leading to a surge of panic and confusion. In the early stages, the Germans rapidly advanced, managing to encircle Minsk, capturing 300,000 Soviet soldiers. It was a moment that marked significant initial success for the Germans, showcasing the devastating impact of their well-coordinated attack plans. This surprise was a key advantage for the Germans, who were able to control a vast area very quickly.
Despite these early victories, the Soviet forces displayed remarkable determination and resistance. The bravery and tenacity of the Soviet soldiers hindered the German advance by putting up stubborn defenses. For instance, at Smolensk, Guderian and Hoth's operations revealed the extent of Soviet resolve. Though the Germans surrounded many Soviet troops, they faced unexpected challenges from weather and the tireless Soviet defense efforts. The Soviets' resilience slowed the German momentum significantly.
Even as the Germans pushed deeper, their progress was soon hampered by the infamous Russian weather. Roads turned to thick mud, slowing the German vehicles to a crawl. This unexpected turn in weather created logistical nightmares. Furthermore, the scorched earth policy adopted by the retreating Soviet troops added to the difficulties, as they destroyed infrastructure and supplies the Germans might have used. This scorched landscape limited the resources available to the advancing German forces.
Alongside the challenges of the terrain, the Soviets also evacuated factories and destroyed railway stocks, complicating German efforts to use these resources. The Soviet tactic of moving entire industries further east and removing vital equipment from German reach was a critical strategic move. However, despite these challenges, the German advance continued towards Moscow. Each move forward was met with increased difficulty, embodying the growing complexity of their campaign as they progressed further into Soviet territory.
With the German forces progressing into Soviet territory, there were intense discussions on their strategic direction. Some favored a direct attack on Moscow, which was seen as the heart of the Soviet defense. The OKH proposed that capturing Moscow could lead to a quicker victory and bring an end to Soviet resistance. However, others hesitated, wondering if redirecting efforts elsewhere might yield better results in the long term.
At this juncture, Hitler's focus seemed to shift towards Ukraine and the Donets Basin. Rundstedt had already seen success there, breaking Soviet defenses and pushing the front lines further east. For Hitler, the rich resources and oil fields of these areas were appealing. Securing them would mean enforcing economic pressure on the Soviet Union, possibly leading to their downfall. This decision, however, stirred debates on whether military efforts were being spread too thin.
The Germans executed a massive encirclement at Kiev, capturing an astounding 520,000 Soviet soldiers. This operation showcased the German army's tactical proficiency and capacity to achieve large-scale victories. Despite this, the Soviet forces continued to exhibit a staunch defensive stance that caught the Germans off guard. It added complexity to strategic planning. The high number of prisoners seemed a triumph, yet it was also emblematic of the hard resistance that persisted.
Where matters got complicated was with the Soviet high command. Stalin made critical decisions, sometimes ignoring his advisors, leading to stubborn orders that were not always wise. This rigid command style faced critique. Meanwhile, the Germans missed forecasting the Soviet capacity for rapid recovery and replenishing their forces. The German miscalculations here meant their strategic advantages were not as long-lasting as hoped. Their campaign thus faced newfound obstacles.
As the drive towards Leningrad came to a halt by Hitler's command, the German forces found themselves in a challenging position. Rundstedt, on the other hand, was pushing further east with great energy, hoping to capitalize on past successes. This shift in direction was strategic, but added to the already complex situation on the ground. The movement was crucial for maintaining pressure, yet it also tested the limits of the forces involved, stretching supply lines further as they advanced.
Meanwhile, Bach resumed the offensive towards Moscow with renewed vigor. His forces achieved initial success at Vyazma, capturing another 600,000 Soviet troops. It seemed a decisive gain, expanding their control and making great progress. Yet, as promising as it appeared, new obstacles loomed on the horizon. These first victories met with an unexpected challenge as they were met by new Soviet forces, ready to defend against the advancing German threat.
The German troops began to feel the effects of exhaustion from continuous combat, coupled with harsh weather conditions. The relentless advance had taken its toll on their stamina. As the struggle continued, severe weather further intensified, making each step forward increasingly difficult. It was a double blow, the tiredness of the troops meeting the oppressive reality of nature. These conditions forced the German generals to reconsider their strategy as physical, and logistical constraints threatened their plans.
The October rains transformed the landscape into a muddy morass, drastically slowing movement and complicating maneuvers. Both vehicles and soldiers struggled in the difficult terrain, presenting a new kind of battle against the elements. At the same time, fresh Soviet forces emerged, bolstering defenses and challenging the Germans' every move. This resistance not only symbolized the determination of the Soviet soldiers, but also signaled to the Germans that their path would not be as straightforward as anticipated. Their momentum was in jeopardy.
As the weather turned colder, things became even more difficult for the German forces. The challenging conditions added to their growing frustration. Harsh weather started to slow down their progress, impacting both morale and strategy. Discussions among the German generals began to focus on whether or not to halt the campaign. The severe weather, coupled with the physical strain on the troops, was becoming a critical concern for their advance.
Despite the worsening situation, Bach remained determined to push forward. His belief in the Soviet collapse was strong, possibly overlooking key realities of the battlefield. This misjudgment perhaps stemmed from underestimating the Soviets' capability to reinforce and counterattack. It was a lesson in the unpredictability of war. Optimism from earlier successes now had to contend with the hard truths of an extended campaign in unfamiliar and hostile terrain.
Although the Germans achieved some progress earlier, their advances became slower. The resistance from the Soviet forces showcased their unyielding spirit. Soviet resilience continued to be a thorn in the German side, keeping them from securing a decisive victory. The persistence of Soviet defense reflected their enduring strength, countering the German offensives and delaying their plans. This resilience was beginning to shift the dynamic of the campaign, posing new challenges for the attackers.
Within the German command, arguments persisted, highlighting inconsistencies and disagreements on the best course of action. The challenges they faced were not only from the Soviets, but also stemmed from political and strategic errors. These internal conflicts added to the complexity of the situation. Such tensions within the command structure might have further undermined their efforts, making a tough situation even more problematic. These issues were pivotal in determining the course of the late campaign. If you've enjoyed our deep dive into historical events, make sure to like and comment on this episode. Your engagement helps us continue to create more content. Additionally, if you'd like to access the full transcripts of our talks, you can support us by hitting the Join button on YouTube for paid membership, where we'll provide access to these documents. Your support is invaluable in keeping our content alive and thriving.